I was asked to speak on Brenda Dervin. I think there are two kinds of people in the world: those who realized who Brenda Dervin was and what she meant to the world while she was still alive, and those who did not. And I feel very fortunate to have been among those who realized the value and worth of Brenda Dervin and what she meant to the world. And I think all the people listening to this today, and all of you gathered in this room, are those who know who Dervin was and have been touched by her writings, or got to know her in one way or the other. And when I was doing my PhD at the National University of Singapore in the early 2000s, and I was a new PhD student, I read a lot of research literature, and I found that many of the writings that I came across were typical academic writing, which were unimpressive in multiple ways. But when I read what Dervin wrote, it was very refreshing, and she was forthright, honest, funny, and I was immediately attracted to her writings. And in those times, I started writing a research paper bringing together various theories and models of information-seeking behavior, and I sent it to JSIST. And from the reviews that I got, one of the reviewers wrote a long review, and somewhere along in the middle of the review, the reviewer said, "By this time, you must have guessed that I'm talking about Dervin because you must have guessed that I'm Dervin." And so that was one of the huge moments for me, because Brenda Dervin reviewing my paper and then identifying herself as the reviewer. So over the years, as I was working on those on revisions to that paper, I read Brenda Dervin's sense-making methodology reader and other writings of her, and tried to make sense of it. And in 2012, I wrote a paper on making sense of sense-making for the ACIST History Pre-Conference. And there were sporadic emails with Brenda, like one-liners over the years. And I did have the opportunity to see her in person from a distance at a conference. I think it was in the 2008 ACIST conference, ACIST annual meeting in Columbus, Ohio, when I saw her from a distance, but didn't go and introduce myself to her at that point. And she had written to me once or twice when she read the paper that I had written on sense making, and I responded to that. But it was only in the last 2 or 3 years when I was working on this project called Project Oneness World, where I was interviewing stalwarts of the information science field, where I approached her if she would if she would agree to be interviewed by me, and she very graciously agreed. And that was, I think, one of the biggest moments for me when I got to interview her, because it was a very difficult interview for her. She had to be interviewed. She was disabled, and she had to be interviewed lying down, and we were doing like a remote interview. And initially we were thinking of an audio interview, but she agreed to do it on video. And then in the course of the interview, I think we had multiple phone calls, and we did also multiple recordings for that, and we had a lot of email interaction. And somewhere along the line, she became from a person who I deeply admired to a friend, I think. And that when she changed from me calling her Professor Dervin to call me Brenda. And I always felt that what I see of myself in terms of my value system for the world, the way I look at people, and if there was one person who I could identify with completely in terms of the persons who were still alive and whose value systems I could follow, and that was Dervin. She saw human beings as human beings first, and she was very aware of the importance of difference in human beings, and that not all difference in human beings needs to be resolved. And I think the value that she brought in was that she was able to take these philosophical principles and then bring it down to the level of research methods and how it could be applied to the fields of information science and human communication. So she was a person who was able to take philosophical and theoretical ideas and bring it down to a practical level. And I think she she was deeply she was truly a treasure, and I'm glad that she has left behind so many of her writings for all of us to follow, and also to be inspired by from her life. And when I interviewed her, she told me that it was the last interview of hers, and I told her that no, that she'll have many more interviews to do, and she said, no, you're very kind, but I accept. And she said, like, she was very accepting of whatever difficulties she had faced, not just in the later years of her life, but pretty much all her life. And that, if you watch that interview in projectonenessworld.com, you'll see that it's like, that she was very, very vulnerable, but at the same time very, very courageous. I think if I see her life, I find courage at every step. So there is a lot to learn from her life and from her works, and from a sense making theory and methodology. And I just hope that we all find ways to remember to keep a legacy alive, and to continue forward the work that she so bravely and courageously did all her life. So thank you, and I'm very, very glad to be part of this community that remembers Brenda Dervin. Thank you.